Hello, everyone. This is Kristina co-founder of Mindvalley. And traditionally, on Wednesdays, I have my book club interviews. And just to remind you guys that for the book club interviews, we invite only the best authors of the newly released books. So as you know, we do reviews of all the books that are being released. I mean, we review them. We don't share them with you. We share with you only the best. But that's not it. For the interviews, we invite the best of those best. So my guest today is Dr. Emily Jamea. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Kristina. Thank you so much for having me today. It's such an honor.
Thank you so much for joining Mindvalley Book Club. And I hope I pronounce your family name properly. I was a little bit concerned.
No problem.
It's a little, it's unusual, I think, in my opinion. What's the origin, if you don't mind me asking that straight away?
Not at all. My husband is Persian, so it's actually a shortened version of their family name when they lived in Iran, because if they had used the whole thing, then you definitely would not have been able to pronounce it. But we say Jamea.
Oh, wow. That explains it. So, yeah, thank you for that explanation. And my guest, just a short introduction. My guest is a sex and relationship therapist in Texas. Are you in Texas right now?
I am. I'm in muggy Houston.
Well, Houston is a wonderful place. So Emily has been doing this practice for over 15 years and has thousands of clients. Her work has been featured in Oprah Magazine, CNN, NBC, USA Today. And by the way, her latest book that we are going to discuss today, Anatomy of Desire, just got USA Today onto USA Today bestsellers list. Is it number one as well?
No, it hit number 45, which, I mean, to be in top 50 that day was like, we were having a conversation before we started recording, and I was telling you, to publish a book was such a dream, but to hit the USA Today bestsellers list, I didn't even imagine that was possible. So I'm just so honored.
And it's actually a huge, huge, huge achievement, because we know there are thousands of books published every week. And when you hit the list, you're not competing with just the books of that week. You're actually competing with the books of that year, pretty much.
Yeah,
so
you are.
It's a huge achievement, and congratulations on that. So the book, Anatomy of Desire, that's what we're going to be talking about. And if you guys haven't read that book yet, we did share the link. I really encourage you to do that. The book is about, of course, it is about sexual relationship with your partner. But if you dive deep into it, you will realize that this is a lot of work on your own self, because you bring yourself into a relationship, into sex, into this partnership, intimate partnership. So it struck me as I was reading it that it is as much about self-development as it is about the development of the relationship. And we'll go deep into that, and I'll probably say a few more words about this book. But for Mindvalley audience, I have to say that this is exactly the kind of book that you like, because it has the real world examples. It has scientific backing, but it also has practical tasks for you to do and actually live the transformation as you're reading it. So, what I wanted to start the discussion with is that your book, although it is about relationships, it's actually based in one interesting theory from psychology, I guess, the theory of flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. You do mention him quite a bit. And as you were writing that, it is not very common to apply flow to relationships, especially to sex. We more usually talk about flow when we talk about productivity or work or professional mastery. It struck me that you're so right. So is this really the first book that applies flow to sex, which seems to be like a match born in heaven?
I know. Yes, it's true. I mean, Csikszentmihalyi, I think in his book Flow, wrote like one short paragraph talking about flow and sex, and that was it. And, I reached a point in my career where I was paying really close attention to the language my clients were using to describe the sex they wanted. They wanted to get lost in the moment. They want the world around them to disappear. And I'm like, they're wanting a flow state. Like, that just makes, of course, that's what we all want to experience during sex. And so being, an evidence-based practitioner, of course, I turned to the literature to see what I could find, and there was nothing out there. I found one study looking at a small sample size of BDSM practitioners, kind of assessing like altered states of consciousness, but that was it. And, what I was interested in is seeing if among people who scored really high on sexual satisfaction questionnaires, if the state that they were getting into was indeed a flow state. So that formed the basis of the research study I did. And I found that, yes, they were definitely getting into a flow state. And what was really exciting is that we found kind of a direction in the relationship. So we found that flow state actually predicted sexual satisfaction, which was really exciting to me, because what that meant is it's not, it wasn't just kind of a lucky strike that they were able to get into a flow. It meant that I could teach people about flow, and I could teach them how to link it to their sex life. And in doing so, improve their satisfaction. And that's exactly what I started doing in my clinic, and is what eventually evolved into the book.
So, sorry if it's a little bit maybe tongue in cheek, but I want to stick on this topic a little bit. You said that, that there is a correlation that if people who were in a state of flow or who were capable of creating it were better satisfied with sex. Is there any correlation between, if you are satisfied with your sex, you also perform better professionally because you have mastered the elusive state of flow?
I don't know of any studies looking at that specifically, but we do know that there are tons of benefits to being sexually satisfied. People who are satisfied report their lives as being more meaningful. They have, better mental health. They say that they're happier overall. They have lower rates of depression. They have better physical health. So, I'm assuming that would eventually spill over into work performance. If you're feeling so good about yourself and all these other domains, assuming you enjoy your job, I would imagine your performance would benefit from that too.
So I know when it comes to talking about flow in the professional setting, or let's say if we're talking about like some kind of professional expression or mastery, then there is this idea that catching flow is kind of complicated, and you have to really like work hard on learning how to do that. Is it similar to sex, or is it easier to master being in the flow when you're talking about sex, or is it harder?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily much harder or easier. I think what matters the most is having a partner who's equally invested in getting into a flow state. If you look at group flow, which we have research on, imagine a group of musicians who's jamming out, playing music that isn't planned, or, a soccer or football, depending on where you are in the world, team, they can kind of move on the field almost automatically when they're in that really heightened state of group flow. But in both cases, it's because everyone in the band or everyone on the team is invested in that high performance. Now, performance is not typically a word I like to use when we're talking about sex. So changing that word then to experience, assuming that everyone is invested in that peak experience, you do the same thing you would for just about anything else.
So I have a question for those who are attending live right now, although those who are watching it in recording, you're also welcome to answer that if you dare. And then I'll have a question for you, Emily. So if you're watching it right now, if I know it's not an anonymous environment, but I would like to ask you, how satisfied are you with your sex? Either on a scale from 0 to 10. I do not know if it's a very fair question, or you can just use an emoji if you don't want to be too explicit about your answer. And the question to you, Emily, is that I know that the book, and you work with couples, and I want to respect that. And the book is for couples. So if you're watching it and you have a partner, that book is definitely for you. But as a single person, I want to ask, is there anything in this book, and for myself, I know the answer, but just so that we are clear, is there anything in this book for people who do not have a partner, not necessarily, maybe they don't even have, I'm sorry, a sex buddy at the moment?
Sure, absolutely. I really encourage singles to take a look at this book, because it will arm you with everything you need to bring your best self into your next relationship. And, for people who haven't read the book yet, it's each chapter kind of dives into one of my 5 secrets for lasting intimacy. But the way the chapters are structured is that I first talk about what that secret is. Then I talk about how to kind of cultivate that quality within yourself before eventually transferring it to a relationship and ultimately to your sex life. And, there's tons of stuff that people can do, whether they are single or partnered, to really ensure they bring their best foot forward to their next relationship.
Thank you for that. And yes, as a person who was reading it as a single person, I still found it very how to say, transformational in many aspects, because there is a lot of work with yourself, with understanding yourself, with understanding your relationship with the sex. And sometimes maybe it is a relief to go through that at your own pace alone, slowly, and not be in a position where you have to negotiate also with your partner about this process. So if you're single,
Exactly.
the book is still valid for you. Now, I do not see the answers, but if you're, Emily, if you see the answers and you want to comment anything, you're welcome.
Yeah. We've got some fairly satisfied people in our group. I'm seeing a lot of 8 out of 10, 10 out of 10,
Oh, that's
7,
great.
6.5 to 8, 8 to 9. So this is not a group that's struggling too much in the bedroom, it looks like, which I'm
But
happy to
we are
hear.
here, and we're here for a reason. So
Yeah.
let's dive deeper, because maybe after you go through the book, you will evaluate your current 8 as a 6. So who
Sure.
knows? So the book is busting quite a lot of myths, and one of the most prominent ones that you're talking about is that there is this idea that familiarity and comfort and safety very often kills the buzz and kills the passion and the desire for novelty, or let's say the emotion that novelty gives us when it comes to sex. I guess people understand what I mean. So one of the prominent myths that you're busting is that because you are in a committed long-term relationship doesn't mean that your sex has to be mediocre. Is that something which you came to understand from the very start when you started working with the people, or was there some kind of a revelation that actually made you see that what we as a society think about sex in a long-term relationship is wrong?
Well, this was not, this idea that great sex and emotional safety can't go hand in hand. I mean, this has been backed up in studies that precede my own. So, it's particularly studies looking at attachment styles. So, people who have an anxious attachment style tend to have sex in order to feel validated in the relationship. People who have avoidant attachment styles tend to have sex that's very performative. And it's really only people who have a more secure attachment style that feel safe enough to kind of quote unquote let go and enjoy the ride. But this narrative that you can't have it all, that you either have safety and security and dull sex, or you have, insecurity, unpredictability, and great sex, is one that has kind of spread like wildfire, but it's in fact not rooted in sound research. I'm sure a lot of people out there can think of the time they kind of dated the bad boy, or they dated the kind of, wild and crazy girl, and the sex was really hot. And it may have been for like a few months, but eventually the emotional climate in the relationship is going to start affecting how you feel sexually once that initial high kind of wears off, and you'll start to feel dissatisfied. So if we're looking particularly at sustaining great sex for the long haul, trust and security and safety are a really important part of that. Now, that trust and safety is a bit of a different concept than like being overly enmeshed with one's partner. So when we are securely attached to someone, we feel free enough to, go on the girls' trip, or we feel secure enough to take the risk. And so it's balancing that security with autonomy, which I think is what Esther Perel really meant, in her TED Talk that went so viral. It's not about, she gives the example of, it's when I see my partner holding court, right? When I see them being their best self, and here I am as a secure base, or vice versa. So it's having that security and that balance of autonomy and individuality and separateness. It's both and it's in that sweet spot, that great sex lies.
Mhm.
So being securely attached doesn't mean you have to be joined at the hip or bored at all. In fact, I mean, I think of my own relationship. I don't know that I would have felt confident enough to take this leap of faith and write the book had my husband, in so many words, not said, I'm here for you, regardless of what happens. If this is a success, if it's a failure, I'm not going anywhere. I support you, right? That's what a
Mhm.
secure attachment is. And so of course, I'm like, well, come here and let me make out with you for that, right? That's where that hot sex is born, is in that balance.
So, as I'm thinking of popular culture, this narrative is also quite common. The couple was hot and sexy and interesting, but then they kind of forgot themselves, they forgot each other. And then a lot of the times, the movies prescribe something like, role play. I was just watching a movie role play on the plane. Maybe that's why it came to my mind. But some kind of excitement and something out of the ordinary, and we think of get some sexy underwear and try to put some effort into that. Yet, as I was reading your book, it seems that this not necessarily is the solution, at least not for everyone. So what are we missing when it comes to spicing up our private lives? And maybe that's not a fair question, because I know you dedicated the whole book to that.
No, I think we've got to take a deeper look. I think it's really important to understand the psychology of novelty. We know from research, and not just my own research, other studies, that novelty is a key predictor of long-term satisfaction. So that is an important component, but I think understanding the why will help people feel more comfortable and confident as they start taking steps that are a bit outside their comfort zone. Flow state has 8 components. You don't have to have all 8 at the same time, but one of them is something called the challenge skills balance. And striking the right balance between challenge and skills is one of the most predictable ways to get into a flow state. It's a great flow hack. So what is that? It means challenging yourself in a way that, this comes as a big surprise to people, challenging yourself in a way that is just 4% greater than your skill set or comfort level. So, imagine that you play tennis and you play with the same partner over and over and over again, and you are very used to their serve. At this point, it's kind of become a predictable game. Challenging yourself with someone who is just a hair more skilled at tennis than your previous partner could be just enough to really put you in the zone. And the same applies to sex. So, this isn't really, it's not always about new behaviors, and that can certainly be an important piece and an exciting piece, but sometimes it's about taking something that is familiar. Let's say the missionary position, okay? Pretty basic position for most couples. Taking something that's familiar, but then making it more psychologically or emotionally interesting. So I had one client, and I wish I would have put this story in the book, but it was already in editing at this point. But I was doing this work with a client in my clinic, and he said, okay, we're used to the missionary position. That's what we typically do. But what I did last time is I took her hands and I kind of pinned them over her head. And that kind of evoked a sense of dominance and, surrender within her. And, she reported after the fact that was really hot and kind of helped tighten her focus. Same position, different energy around it, right? Same position. Let's say maybe instead of just kind of that belly to belly, missionary kind of lazy, rhythm that people get into, really taking your partner and inviting them to make eye contact with you, right? That can add a level of intensity. So all that to be said, it's sometimes those more subtle, energetic or emotional shifts that is all you need to get into a flow state. Sometimes, it's trying new behaviors and different things sexually. And I have a huge checklist in the book with all different things that a couple might consider trying. And I invite them to go through the list individually and then compare notes with their partner and try to overlap as much as possible. But I think where a lot of people fail is maybe they go too big too fast. They step way
Mhm.
too far outside their comfort zone. So they're not at 4%, they're at like 40% greater, and they feel totally intimidated and uncomfortable, and they go back to what they're used to and feel bored. So it's about working with your partner to strike the right balance.
I think that's actually a very significant point that you were talking about. The 4% definitely is a striking idea, and a lot of the times, especially people who are interested in personal growth, we slightly overdo things. And there's this whole. I was just talking to my masseuse today about being outside the comfort zone,
Yeah.
and I suggested that maybe like with exercise, you exercise, but you also need the time to restore. Maybe with the comfort zone is the same
Mhm.
thing. We don't need to be
Yeah.
always outside the comfort zone.
Yep.
But back to what you were talking, I also noticed there are a lot of examples of very subtle changes which are not behavioral per se. Sometimes it's reframing or looking at things differently, which apparently have brought changes to your clients. And for those of you who are planning to read the book is full of real life examples of real couples with their real problems, which a lot of them are relatable to the reader. What I wanted to ask is a lot of the exercises and work and thinking that you ask your couples to do are outside the bedroom, which is a little
Mhm.
bit unexpected. Of course, if you're strictly into sex and tricks about sex, then you will find that as well. But I want to
Yeah.
talk about this. Why do you start outside the bedroom in solving people's bedroom problems?
Yeah, so there's this really fun body of research looking at self-expansion. And essentially, they took couples, there were a series of studies they did. They took couples who were experiencing low desire or relationship satisfaction, and they gave them something new to try together, maybe shucking an oyster for the first time. Pretty, nothing too crazy. But the couples who tried something new were something like 36 times more likely to have sex that night compared to couples who did what they typically do on a given Saturday afternoon. Not twice as likely, like 36 times more likely. Like it was pretty much a guarantee that they were going to have great sex. And they found that, couples who tried to do new things on a somewhat regular basis did report greater relationship satisfaction, sexual satisfaction, increase in desire. And for a lot of couples, these results were sustained over time. So sometimes it's not necessarily doing something new in bed, it's doing something new outside the bedroom. And then that sense of novelty, that energy of novelty and having a shared experience together gets transferred in. So it's that energetic shift, which can make you feel like you've done something new in bed, even though you haven't. It was outside the bedroom. So, I think that's something important to remember when scheduling a date night, for instance. Like I tell my husband all the time, we have to balance because he really loves long dinners and having meaningful conversation. And that's great. But I'm also kind of an experience gal, I'm like,
Mhm.
let's sign up for a dance class or let's go to the theater, like I like those
Mhm.
new experiences because that's what enlivens me. And so I really encourage couples to think of new things that they can do together in their relationship because we do know from the research that that will help give you a great boost sexually as well.
So I have two questions, but I hope I remember both of them by the time I'm done asking. But the first one is, but that would be also true in a slightly more complicated setting. For example, if you never have time to do interesting new things with your closer family, and you end up doing all the exciting new things with your friends or colleagues, that means that this could create like a fertile ground for infidelity because you would get that boost of novelty somewhere else.
Well, what I think the strongest correlates for infidelity are, feeling either emotionally or sexually neglected in your primary relationship, and then an opportunity outside the relationship presenting itself, and then kind of succumbing to that opportunity. So I don't necessarily know of evidence that suggests that people who do new things individually are more likely, to be unfaithful, other than maybe they have more opportunity to connect with,
Mhm.
a new sexual partner. But as long as there is emotional and sexual connection in the primary relationship, doing new things on your own can be a really great thing. Like I was talking about before, having that sense of individuality, knowing who you are outside of your relationship with your partner is really important. And I think that's really what Esther Perel was talking about when she, kind of started this kind of new way of thinking about desire, 20 years ago and brought that to the conversation. I see a lot of couples who, and women in particular, who kind of lose their identity to their partner, and in particular through motherhood. Suddenly they were this really vibrant, unique individual, and then they get married and they're just maybe they let go of their careers and their whole identity is wrapped up in being a wife. Their whole identity is wrapped up in being a mother. And not that there's anything wrong with dedicating oneself or the majority of oneself to those relationships, but I'm like, at least sit on a board, at least volunteer, at least have a mahjong group, like do something that's just for you outside of your primary relationship so that you don't lose that sense of self separate from your partner.
So what would be, again, maybe unfair questions, what would be a healthy proportion of doing things on your own, having your own portion of life, versus actually not forgetting to occasionally invite your husband for a salsa evening?
Exactly. So every couple has different degrees of their need for separateness versus togetherness. I mean, I see couples where they are most of the time pretty attached at the hip. I see other couples who do a lot individually. The key is partnering up with someone who kind of shares your value in terms of the proportion of time spent alone versus together. That's what's most important. But let's say you're in a partnership where, I would say at least, once a month, try to do something that's just for you, separate from your responsibilities at home or time spent with your partner would be a good place to start.
So another question, which I fortunately remember, which I wanted to ask, but before I want to show you guys the cover of the book. Maybe you can show the actual book,
Sure.
just so we have product placement. Yes, that's a
Yeah.
book. And if you're in US, I'm sure you'll find it in the bookshops. Europe, I'm not sure yet. I have to go and check. But the question that I fortunately, it's coming.
It's being translated in lots of different languages right now, so it'll be there.
This is cool. So one question I want to ask, there is another paradigm in personal growth, which a lot of people like, which is fake it till you make it. Now, when I was reading your book, it did seem that the transformation was genuine. But if you're in a couple and you want to put a lot of effort into making it work, you maybe don't feel it, but you still go into it. What do you think in that context of faking till you make it? Because people who are a little bit perfectionists, for example, or people who are into personal growth, they may tend to just push through in hopes that, you'll make it and it will get better.
Yeah. So I think this is such a great question. And I noticed Alex in the chat said, one challenge when having kids, work, life, the energy left for intimacy is pretty much non-existent. How can we create space for that? So I think, what I'm about to say really speaks to that, because this is, couples who just feel so disconnected. The idea of having optimal sex just seems completely far-fetched. So how do you go from 0 to 100? You don't jump there. You don't just make a decision to have optimal sex. While I don't love the phrase fake it till you make it, because that implies almost inauthenticity, there is something to be said for kind of pushing through the awkwardness. So a lot of people will say, well, we're not doing it because it's been so long, and every time we start to connect, it just feels clunky. It feels awkward. Like the spark isn't there. Like, how do we do it without it feeling awkward? And I'm like, well, sorry, but the only way out is in, you know? So this applies to anything you haven't done in a while. I mean, I used to go skiing once a year and I would get into definite a state of flow when I'm like flying down the mountain. And then for whatever reason, I think like 5 or 6 years went by and I hadn't skied. And we went for a ski trip. When I put those ski boots on, I'm like, how the heck do I walk in these? I was nervous going up the chairlift. Like I had to do a few greens in the pizza wedge before I started to build my confidence back up. But the answer wouldn't have been to jump right onto a black slope again. You know, that would have been, again, challenge skills, like way too outside my skill set at that time in my life. You know, but the answer also wouldn't have been just praying for the feeling of awkwardness to go away and I could feel free again. The only answer was to start slow and to keep doing it even though it felt awkward. And that's the exact advice I give to my clients. I'll tell them, you know, set time aside once a week minimum, because if you wait too long, you're starting at the beginning again. Set aside time once per week minimum and just kind of let your skin touch your partner's skin. You don't have to have full-blown intercourse the first time if that feels, you know, too threatening or uncomfortable for you. But to have that uninterrupted time where you're making eye contact, maybe having a conversation to deepen the emotional intimacy while also letting your bodies touch physically is a great way to start breaking through the barriers and kind of levels of discomfort that have perhaps built up over time. But you got to take the baby steps. You know, a musician who hasn't played in a long time has to retune their instrument. You know, an athlete who hasn't been on the field in a long time is going to have to do maybe more warm-ups and stretches to kind of prepare for that flow state. So the same principle applies to sex.
Thank you for that answer. And I just want to add from my own perspective that this book is very encouraging because there is a lot of space for you to take it in your at your own pace and not rush into the black slope, as you said.
Don't do that.
I want to ask a question which wasn't in your book, but just I'm just curious because the book is structured. So there are 5 secrets, as you see, 5 secrets to create connection and cultivate passion, and the book is built around the 5 skills that you will need to create this flow in your sex relationship. And we'll probably have a little time to mention that as well. I'm deliberately not going deep into that because I want you guys to get the book and read it for yourself.
Give it all away.
Well, I'm not afraid to give a lot, but every chapter is built around that. There is a couple in each chapter who is kind of leading the way for you, and then there are concepts, there are exercises for you to do and to try for you to take on this seat in the therapy chair of Dr. Emily Jamea. But the question that I have, I'm a little curious about that because most of the couples here have a happy ending. Have you had in your practice, because you've practiced for 15 years, situations where people's sex breaks and then the relationship doesn't come back together? Are there any signs or anything where you know that, okay, this is not just me being awkward and rusty and, not doing the right thing, but this is the end of it?
Sure. It's funny you say that because my husband, when he read a draft in the book, he was like, well, maybe you should include a couple where things didn't work out because it doesn't, things don't always work out for people. And I was like, yeah, but I want to focus on the couples who did work things out. But you're right. Yes. I mean, sometimes people grow apart. I see this, especially, I would say, in couples who get married extremely young. And rather than growing together, they start to drift apart and their identities really evolve beyond, what they shared earlier in their relationship. And maybe their values change and they just can't really renegotiate their newfound sense of self with who their partner is at that season in life. And I think, we see this because we are living a lot longer. I think statistically now people will have on average like 3 long-term, significant, meaningful relationships in their lifetime. And at least people in my generation, I'm concerned about the younger generation because a lot of them are in their 20s, never having experienced romantic love. And that's very concerning to me. Not to digress, but so yeah, I mean, we see the divorce rate, people do split up. I think that generally speaking, we can't have very high expectations of our partner. We expect them to check every single box. And especially, I know we have people from all over the world, but in the West, where we have such kind of that me culture, that individualistic society, it's very focused on getting your own individual needs met and putting too much pressure on your partner to meet those needs for you. That's not really good for a relationship. So, while I always have hope for my clients, I don't say I'm in the business of always keeping people together. Sometimes it's really asking some deeper questions to see if going their separate ways is a better solution.
So since you mentioned that somewhere in your answer, I want to ask, you've done this practice for 15 years, and a lot of things have changed in the 15 years. Okay, maybe we've had internet for all this time, but
Yeah.
But maybe 15 years ago, I think our phones were much more simple.
Yeah.
So in your practice, I know how you mentioned it. You mentioned that the young kids don't have romantic relationships at the age of 20, which is, I've also come across that statistics, that there's a concerning sign. But what have you seen? How are relationships evolving? How is sex evolving as our circumstances in life change?
It's devolving. It's not evolving, it's devolving. There was an interesting report that came out not too long ago that found that, for older generations like millennials and Gen X, they've had several romantic relationships under their belt, but maybe where they feel inhibited is in expressing kinks or desires or preferences to their partner, because that's not something that was really part of the cultural lexicon when they were younger. So it's the language they're trying to learn. Versus younger generations, despite holding the most sexually expansive views in history. I mean, you be what gender you want, you have what kink you want, like you do you, have never had a romantic relationship. And, I do feel really concerned about that. I wish that there was, as we are getting more comfortable with a wider variety of sexuality, which I do think is a good thing, that romantic connection, kept up with that. Where I feel concerned is there's almost like a shaming that happens for people who maybe aren't, open to kink, for example. And, I think that that's something you work toward, you build up to. You've got to, in my opinion, kind of set a foundation where you, again, have that emotional security, have that sense of safety before building into different kinds of sexual experiences. And that's just not happening as much. I think, dating in the digital age, I just wrote an article, it'll be coming out in the next print edition of Psychology Today, all about this. People on the one hand are so quick to judge potential partners, they get the ick over just about anything, yet at the same time are so afraid of being judged or rejected that they don't put themselves out there. So like, how is a relationship ever going to build? And so I think we have some work to do on, being more accepting and open and giving people second and third chances, building up a little bit more grit and resilience so you don't take it too personally if someone doesn't like you the first date or whatever. But I think the whole landscape of dating and connecting has changed in a way that's not great. That concerns me.
Yeah,
So I see a
actually,
question here that Masha highlighted.
yeah.
Does the book mention anything for people who have experienced abuse? I don't get into that as much, although there are some really great books that do. You have to remember this book is more about helping people experience sex at the optimal level. And so, a lot of times that's not going to happen at all if there is untreated abuse or, sexual coercion or sexual assault. So those kinds of things should definitely, and I talk about that a little bit in the introduction, that, if you have untreated trauma, or if your relationship is on the verge of divorce or breakup, or in crisis, or you have active addiction or mental health issues, there are other books that pair really nicely with this book, but that's not the focus of this book.
Although I think if you have a trauma like this, a therapist would be even a better idea.
Yes, yeah, you need to talk with a professional for sure. But I can recommend my colleague, Dr. Holly Richmond, released a book maybe last year or the year before. Of course, I'm blanking on the name right now. It's somewhere behind me, but it's a really great book on reclaiming sexuality after sexual abuse or trauma.
Mm. And I want to say to people who are thinking of reading the book, you are in good hands, because as you can tell, Dr. Emily Jamea is a professional therapist. So there are all the warnings where the warnings are due and necessary. So don't worry, you're in good hands. The question I wanted, and it wasn't the question, it was more the comment when you were talking about the devolving of sexual relationships. I remember there was one quote, I probably won't be able, I have actually, highlighted some of the quotes. These are just the quotes from your book.
Yeah.
I won't be able probably to find it quickly, but I'll try to say it by memory, where you say that it's strange how we have separated sex and love almost to the degree where, it's either love or sex. And you were just talking about how young people are so liberated sexually, yet they haven't had a romantic relationship. But reading your book, there was this one impression that I had, that your connection, their relationship itself is important for good sex. It's not just about sex. Ultimately still about a relationship.
Totally. I mean, you can't separate, the components that make you who you are from the sexual experience. I think I say that like 3 or 4 times in the book, that you can't separate your individuality from your sexuality. So anything that affects your sense of self is going to come out through your sexual experience. And beyond that, we're not just talking about the sex that you're having alone. We're, focusing on the sex you're sharing with another partner. And so, if there is a high degree of relationship conflict or insecurity or abuse, even if that's kind of emotional abuse or emotional neglect, if your partner doesn't really seem to care about your needs, that's going to affect the quality of your sex. It certainly is. So, we always have to kind of look at what's happening individually, what's happening relationally, and what's happening environmentally. Young kids, a dog in the bed, a pile of laundry. Not that every star has to be aligned to have great sex, but those types of things do affect it.
So unfortunately, we are not going to get into the 5 secrets, but you do have the book. So just get the book and you'll get to know the 5 secrets. It's actually 5 skills, in my opinion, at least after reading the book. It's the 5 skills you need to achieve the state of flow in your sexual flow. But I want to ask you my traditional question, because we will have to be finishing the interview soon. If people were to change one thing right now, those who, for whatever reason, can't read the book, who won't be able to go to the therapy and to work with a professional, if they could change 1, 2, or 3 things, just 1, 2, or 3 tips to make a change right now, what would that be?
Gosh, so it's so hard for me to say. So what I tell people, because they'll ask, do I have to read the book cover to cover? And the answer is no. What I love about these 5 qualities is 2 things. So let me just list them for people who don't know. So we have sensuality, curiosity, adaptability, vulnerability, and attunement. The great thing about these qualities is that we're born with them. Babies are born sensual, curious. 4-year-olds, I have one right now, I think ask an average of 400 questions per day. Okay. And I can say that's true. Sometimes I'm like, just ask Alexa. So they are born sensual, curious, they can adapt, they are vulnerable emotionally, and they are hardwired to attune. So this is not about, but let me back up to say for various reasons, the influence of gender socialization, culture, religion, trauma, negative experiences, we disconnect from these qualities. So this is not about becoming someone you're not. It's really about learning to reconnect with qualities that are already there within you. That's the first thing. The second thing is, it really depends on what you need. So if you are living a busy life, you've got young kids, you're both working, you feel like you are just running around, life is chaotic, I would read the sensuality chapter, because that's all about like how to Marie Kondo your sex life, how to really re-inhabit the body so you can quiet your mind. If you feel like sex has become kind of boring, routine, monotonous, I would say read the curiosity chapter. If you feel like you have that you're kind of stuck because of a big relationship hurdle, maybe a job loss or a health concern, or taking care of aging parents, or recovering from a knee surgery, I would say the adaptability chapter is for you, because that's going to teach you how to navigate. If there's emotional disconnect, read the vulnerability chapter. And the attunement chapter is interesting. I think it's kind of the gestalt of the other 4 chapters. It's where everything comes together. So, it really just depends on what you need.
Thank you for this answer. And my second traditional question. Before that, I'll ask those who are online to leave a heart for my guest in the chat, and those who are going to be watching it in recording, leave a heart under the video. Either it's on Mindvalley platform or it's on YouTube. Leave a heart under the video, because love, even at a distance, digital love still matters. And now
Thank you.
Question to you, Emily, is so how would you like your book to change the world?
Oh gosh, I view this book as evergreen. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think I wanted this book to be something that couples can pick up at different points throughout the longevity of their relationship. We know that people who connect sexually, as I said before, feel their lives are more meaningful, they're happier, they're healthier. I think there's both a science and an art to great sexual connection. I talk about both in this book. I think I view sex as so much more than a juxtaposition of body parts. I view it as an opportunity for self-expression, for ultimate, relational intimacy. And I think when we have that, we can do anything. So, if I can be a steward towards that goal, then I'll take it.
Thank you so much for writing this book, and I wish your book a huge success, because it is such a necessary topic, especially nowadays. For those of you who are watching, yes, the book, will leave the link to Amazon so you can go and get the book. It is very easily written, as in it's easy to follow it. It is engaging. You live along with couples in each chapter. You want to know how it ends. And the best part, of course, it has a lot of great exercises which you can do both inside and outside the bedroom. So thank you so much for writing this book. And if you guys are watching it through Mindvalley membership and you do not know yet, and you're not still subscribed, I do not know which moon you live on, sign up to my book club. We send weekly reviews of the best new releases, and once a week I invite the best of the best books, the book of the week by Mindvalley Book Club. This is the book of this week. For an interview, and as I like to say, I have access to the world's best authors, and also, with our experience, more than 20 years of experience in personal growth, we are very critical about the books. So the books that we bring to you are truly significant, wonderful, really good. And well, I've been in this industry forever, so if I say it's a good book, it's a good book. So sign up, then you'll be up to date. And for those of you who are watching it on YouTube, well, thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristina.